And welcome back to the final part of tonight's hack attack, where we're just going to be analysing a quick couple of games that I played earlier on tonight against Njbandit. The games were played at a 3-minute time control, 3 minutes for each side with no added bonus per move. So of course if you run out of time you lose the game. And in this first game I had the white pieces and it opened up with a kind of perk modern defence with this early g6. And black's idea is to attack in the centre here with the bishop on g7. And in response I played what's known as the 150 attack. And the idea is to go for a quick castle's queenside in this line as white. And attack over on the king side. So I went h4 here. In order to try and get an attack on the king side. And my opponent did the right thing, which was to respond with e5. Counter-attacking in the centre of the board. And now after castles, I think my opponent made a mistake. He played h5 here. And that made it very uncomfortable for him to have a castle on the king side in this game. And also it gave my knight a really great square on g5. So I think h5 was definitely a mistake here. I'm just trying to work out what he should have played instead. My instinct would be to just castle, I guess, and let me play h5, or maybe go b5 straight away here and go for b4 and queen a5 and for a quick counter attack. Yeah, this is probably the way that black should play it. But okay, instead let's go back to the game. And he went b5. Sorry, he didn't go b5. He went h5. Knight h3, queen c7, knight g5. And now, to all intents and purposes, this knight isn't an outpost. Technically, it's not an outpost because it can be moved away by this pawn on f7. But if he ever goes f6, it leaves not only the g6 square hideously weak, but also the e6 square. So he can't ever really shift my knight away from g5. So he goes a6, trying to prepare a counter-attack over on the queen side. But now my bishop is able to come out to c4. He has to castle into this attack. And this is where I went g4, offering a pawn. In these kind of positions, of course, black can grab the pawn with h takes g4. But white can just continue to give up material on this side of the board. Because once things open up, then black's in a lot of trouble on the king side here. I mean, I could even maybe triple up my pieces on the h-file here. I just can't believe that my opponent could survive in this position for very long. I'm wondering if there's actually a forced win in this position. Just give me a second to calculate. There are a lot of tricks here, but none of them are quite leading to mate just yet. I guess the real answer is that these things are never so easy. But, I mean, for example, I'm just looking at ideas like knight e6, takes, forcing rook f7. But I actually don't see a final breakthrough here. I mean, bishop h6 is pretty strong. I mean, maybe something like this is winning. The idea is that if he moves knight c5 now, I've got queen d8, takes, and he's losing all of his pieces because of this pin. But okay, I mean, that's just to give you some sort of idea. I think it's very, very risky for him to grab that pawn. I mean, I don't have to go h5 straight away. The alternative is maybe even stronger, just to take on g4 straight away, and then after takes, then go h5. That's probably a better way round of doing it. But okay, let's go back and see what happened in the game. He didn't play h takes g4, he went b5 to hit the bishop. Bishop goes back, b4. Knight came to a4. And around about here, I thought my opponent was in lots of trouble because the knight on d7 doesn't have anywhere that it can move to. I mean, it can go back to b8, but that's it. He obviously can't go to c5 or b6 because of the knight on a4 and the bishop on e3. So he came up with a really sensible move here, going c5, which obviously gives his knight a chance to come to b6. It threatens to trap my bishop with c4, and it sometimes allows his bishop to come to b7 and go into the game. And I remember whilst casting here, I thought that that I would be winning if I just played queen d6, but I was really reluctant to play it because it was swapping the queens off into quite a boring position. And the point is that obviously I'm threatening his queen, and he pretty much has to swap the queens off here. And after takes, his queen's no longer on c7, so he can't push forward with c4, and now he's just dropping the pawn on c5. But I guess he could, you know, keep the game going with takes on g4. But even so, I've got to say that I quite like my chances here after takes. Or maybe after takes on c5 first. But anyway, I was really not keen on swapping the queens off here. So I decided to go queen d3 and go for a big attack. And we're going to see if that was the right decision. Because he now did take on g4. I played h5. Takes on g4, knight takes g4, rook takes h5, and let's look at this position for a second. It's for the moment he is a pawn up, but his king is so open. I've got this open h file and this open g file, and whereas my king is safely behind these three pawns, so I'm not getting mated anytime soon. On the flip side, my opponent won a piece here with knight f6, rook goes back to h4, takes on e3, takes back, and then c4, trapping my bishop on b3. I mean, I can't go knight b6 here because of takes on b3, threatening mate on c2. What I guess I could play is takes, queen takes, knight b6, forking the queen and rook. But after he goes back and takes, then he's still got two pieces for a rook here. And the only way that I'm going to be winning is if I'm mating with rook g1, which I might be, but this seems like a much slower version of what I did in the game. So in the game, I decided to simply give up this bishop on b3 and go for mate against the king. So I played rook g1 here, takes on b3. Obviously, there's no time for me to do anything here because he's threatening mate on c2. So a takes b3. And now the question is, what's going on in this position? Obviously, during the game, we were down to not very much time here, so there was no time for any analysis. But we both got 4 pawns, so he's a piece up here. 2 bishops and a knight against my 2 knights. But is there any way for him to defend against my various threats? I mean, in simplistic terms, I'm threatening queen g3, moving the knight to somewhere like h7, and then mating him on g7. Is there any way at all that my opponent can defend against that? I mean, what he played bishop b7 in the game. I'm going to stick my neck out here and say that there's actually no defence for him, because he can't get this rook over to defend. He can't really get his queen over to defend in any way that I can see. I mean, bishop b7 is about as sensible as it gets. I mean, let's say he moves this rook across to d8, because the one problem with bishop b7 is I guess it allowed my queen to come to this h3 square. But if he leaves his bishop on c8, that obviously isn't possible. But if rook d8 and I play queen g3 now, how does he defend against all of my threats? I mean, in simplistic terms, I'm threatening knight h7 and mate on g7. And I just don't see a defence to that. So okay, I think that maybe my p-sec was just about justified, although there's no way at the time that I was able to calculate that. Instead, we saw my opponent go bishop b7. But now after queen h3, I think there's pretty much no defence to this threat of rook h8 check. I'm just looking around for some kind of trick. But yeah, I mean, look, this queen, this bishop, this rook, none of them can come over to the defence of their king. And I was saying that there's no time to calculate in these kind of positions whether or not it's winning for one side. But if you just look, I'm attacking with the queen, both of my rooks and knight. And all he's really defending with is that bishop on g7 and that knight on f6. So to me, it would be really surprising if there was some way of defending. In the game, my opponent tried a desperate counterattack with rook f to c8, threatening mate on c2. But this now allows a rather nice forced mate. If you're watching this on the highlights package on YouTube, you can always pause the video right now and see if you can find the forced win. Or you might decide that you just want to simply continue. The solution is rook h8 check. Obviously he can't recapture that with the king because the queen covers that, so bishop takes h8 is forced. Knight e6 check. Discovered attack from the rook on g1. The king cannot go anywhere because the knight covers the f8 square. So the only thing he can do is blockade. Knight g4, rook takes g4, and then the final piece to blockade, bishop g7, rook takes g7, and it's checkmate. Obviously the rook is covered by the knight on e6. So that was the end of that game.